One single strike, a massive underground bunker, and overnight, a 40-year geopolitical deadlock was blown wide open. In this explainer, we're diving into the absolute earthquake that was the 2026 US-Iran war, and more importantly, the ceasefire that followed. Just to put the sheer scale of this into perspective, we are talking about a jaw-dropping $270 billion in direct economic damage to Iran. That is not just a glancing blow. That is a fundamental dismantling of Iranian military capabilities, economic hubs, and the literal infrastructure keeping the regime afloat. This was the catastrophic climax of decades of pressure. But the whole war truly pivoted on one specific day, February 28, 2026. US and Israeli strikes absolutely obliterated a highly secret underground bunker in Tehran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The Telegraph literally called it the assassination of the century. I mean, it crossed a completely new Rubicon in modern warfare, the ultimate decapitation strike. Let's look at our roadmap to understand how this happened. First, the breaking point. Second, the strategy of containment. Third, the strategy of resistance. Fourth, the resilience trap. And finally, breaking the deadlock.
All right, Section 1, the breaking point.
So those targeted strikes did way more than just take out the supreme leader. They wiped out hundreds of senior Iranian leaders. But here's what most people miss. Despite all this overwhelming force, the US didn't actually force total Iranian submission. Instead, the conflict basically held the global economy hostage, severely threatening the Strait of Hormuz. It laid bare the absolute failure of a 40-year deadlock. Pure military force hit its absolute limit, eventually dragging both sides to sign the June 17 Memorandum of Understanding. Which brings us to Section 2, the strategy of containment. So how exactly did Washington handle Iran leading up to this boiling point? Well, for decades, it all came down to containment. Think of it like old-school Cold War logic. The U.S. objective was to apply relentless, sustained pressure through sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The goal? Restrict Iran's power without getting dragged into a messy, direct regime change war. Basically, keep them from challenging U.S. interests or threatening Israel. And you can actually track how this evolved right across different presidencies. Back in the 90s, Clinton rolled out dual containment. Then, Bush lumped Iran into the axis of evil. Obama tried blending this pressure with the 2015 nuclear diplomacy. And then, right up until the 2026 war, Trump went all in on maximum pressure. It was just this constantly escalating drumbeat of coercion. Now, let's flip the board for Section 3, the strategy of resistance. You have to look at this from Tehran's perspective. To them, decades of containment wasn't just foreign policy, it was an imperial plot to collapse their government. So they pushed back with a comprehensive strategy of resistance. They didn't try to match the US tank for tank. Instead, they built up asymmetric weapons, drones, proxy networks, anything to raise the cost of American coercion. It was all about defense, deterrence, and just exhausting Washington until they gave up. When you look at these two side by side, it's pretty wild. On one hand, U.S. containment is constantly squeezing, waiting for a collapse. On the other, Iranian resistance is just absorbing the blows, flat out refusing to capitulate. It's a brutal, self-reinforcing cycle. The U.S. squeezes harder, Iran digs in deeper. Neither side can actually win, which led us straight into the bloody violence of 2026. Okay, Section 4, the resilience trap. Here is the big lesson to take away from Tehran's playbook. Surviving all that pressure had a massive, fatal internal cost. Analysts call it the resilience trap. It's basically a tragic domino effect. First, massive international sanctions hit. Next, those sanctions cause absolutely severe economic hardship for everyday people. Then the state starts breaking down, leading to corruption and mismanagement. And the final domino? Total public outrage and a complete loss of legitimacy. They were literally hollowing themselves out to fight off the US. To give you an idea of how devastating this trap really was, experts estimate Iran's economy is currently only about half the size it should be. Half! That means this resistance strategy essentially vaporized trillions of dollars in lost potential. So yeah, they kept the US at bay on paper for decades, but they impoverished their own citizens to pull it off, leaving the state incredibly fragile. And that fragility led to betrayal. I love how The Atlantic put it regarding Khamenei's assassination. The best planned defenses don't count for much if the people you trust to run them are ready to sell you out. Khamenei was hiding 30 meters underground, blast-resistant rooms, escape tunnels, the whole shebang. But all that concrete couldn't stop the rot inside his own system. That fatal strike in 2026, it was made possible by inside information. Finally,
Section 5. Breaking the deadlock.
Out of all the rubble, the decapitation of leadership, and the economic ruin, we got this incredibly rare moment of diplomatic alignment, the June 17 Memorandum of Understanding. But listen, the experts over at the Quincy Institute are super clear on this. The MOU is not a victory lap for anyone. It is glaring proof of a strategic deadlock. It's basically both sides finally admitting, okay, our strategies are maxed out. This MOU is just a very narrow, very fragile window to break the cycle.
So how do they actually pull off this off-ramp? The MOU kicks off a crucial 60-day window. If they actually use this for good faith diplomacy, it could be a massive game changer. The U.S. would offer real sanctions relief and back off regionally, while Iran commits to verifiable nuclear restraints and genuine de-escalation. It's literally trading pressure for relief and resistance for reconstruction. That is how you turn a shaky ceasefire into a permanent political settlement.
But here is the multi-billion-dollar question. Is this MOU actually a true settlement, or just a brief pause before the next disaster? If Washington just uses this as a breather to squeeze Iran later, or if Tehran spins this as some big resistance victory to their people, nothing actually changes. If they don't break this downward spiral right now, are we just going to watch history violently repeat itself? It is definitely a sobering thought to leave you with. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.